It was not the most powerful engine. In fact, anyone who lived through the 1950s knew the Flathead was famous for running hot. Its side valve design was outdated even before America entered the OHV era. But there is a strange paradox. More than 80 years have passed, and that 239 cubic inch block of iron still makes enthusiasts fall silent before its heartbeat steady exhaust note, as if it were telling a story. Why did a humble machine, once mocked as a kettle with wheels, become the Holy Grail of hot rodding? Today, we open the hood, let the morning gasoline scent reach our senses, and let the Flathead's cranking sound pull us back to a simpler American past. And in that moment, we follow the story of the Ford Flathead 239, the engine that taught an entire nation how to feel speed. When people talk about the Flathead, many often get the timeline wrong. Henry Ford actually released the first mass-market V8 in 1932, the 221 cubic inch version, a technical marvel because Ford cast the entire engine block as a single monoblock piece, something even luxury automakers had not dared attempt. But it was not until 1939, when the 239 cubic inch version appeared under the Mercury brand, that America finally had a star. This was the machine with enough breadth, enough strength, and enough durability to enter legend. The context was unique as well. America had just crawled out of the Great Depression. Workers were back in factories. Construction sites were noisy again. But the shadow of World War II was gathering over Europe, signaling an era in which anything with wheels might be mobilized. The Flathead 239 was born in that moment, strong enough for civilian cars, durable enough for the United States military to choose it for trucks, service vehicles, and countless logistical machines. These 239 cubic inch engines ran through mud, sand, and freezing cold, places where durability was no longer a benefit, but a condition for survival. But the 239's greatest contribution came elsewhere. It brought the V8 to the working class. Before this, V8 engines were the territory of Cadillac, Packard, or Rolls-Royce, symbols of luxury and wealth. Ford, with its philosophy of a car for every home, made 8-cylinder power something you could hear right outside the garage door of any American family. And at first glance, one notices something young engineers today rarely see: the beauty of simplicity. The Flathead design, the Flathead, worked entirely differently from the OHV engines we are familiar with today. There was no camshaft in the cylinder head, no rocker arms, no complex push rods reaching upward. All intake and exhaust valves sat directly inside the engine block, beside each piston. The cylinder head was therefore just a flat steel or aluminum plate fastened with a row of bolts. This is why mechanics of the era could tear down a Flathead cylinder head with only a few basic wrenches. No modern lift, no diagnostic tools. Just an afternoon, a few cans of beer, and an experienced uncle. But do not let that simplicity fool you. Beneath the rustic appearance was a surprisingly bold engineering philosophy for the 1930s. Minimize moving parts, optimize the monoblock casting process, and prioritize ease of maintenance above all. The Flathead was not designed to be the most powerful engine. It was designed to work, to endure, and to be repairable even in small Midwestern towns where the nearest dealership could be hours away. When we look deeper into the heart of the 239 CID, we find numbers that seem gentle. A bore of 3 3/16 inches, a stroke of 3 3/4 inches, a configuration built for low RPM torque, the kind of pulling force farmers, truck drivers, or wartime soldiers needed. Its roughly 100 horsepower output today equals that of a small modern sedan. But in the late 1930s, it made you feel like you were controlling a piece of machinery that was truly alive. Yet the Flathead 239 also had an Achilles heel so well known that every mechanic of the era could recite it: heat. Because the valves sat inside the block, the exhaust gas had to travel through thick iron passages before escaping. Nearly all that thermal energy radiated into the cooling jacket, forcing the engine to fight its own heat. On low mountain passes in California, or while stuck behind post-war freight convoys, the temperature needle could slowly climb as if challenging the driver's patience. To newcomers, the Flathead was nothing more than a kettle that could move, but to seasoned mechanics who had just returned from the greatest war of the century, it was an irresistible challenge. They were used to treating engines like living creatures that could be tamed, used to optimizing every detail under harsh conditions in deserts or jungles. So when they faced the Flathead 239, simple, stubborn, and full of room for improvement, they immediately saw a new playground. And that was when the hot rod era began to take shape, not with the roar of engines, but with the silence of late nights in the garage, the turning of bolts, the scrape of wrenches on steel, the sound of pencils sketching bold modification ideas on scrap paper. After World War II, America rose as if surfacing from a long-held breath. Industry was shifting from military to civilian use. New cars were scarce, and most young soldiers did not have the money to walk into a showroom. But they had knowledge, steady hands, and a hunger for speed. The only thing they lacked was raw material, which they found scattered across junkyards throughout America. There, Flathead 239 engines lay everywhere. Worn-out motors, blocks with hairline cracks, valves frozen in rust, perfect for anyone who wanted to experiment without fear of ruining something valuable. For just a few $dozen, you could drag an old engine home, set it down on the cold concrete floor of a garage, flip on a yellow bulb, and begin your own mechanical dream. Alongside those grassroots efforts, a new generation of metal wizards was rising. In his family garage, Vic Edelbrock experimented with the first aluminum heads, lighter, cooler running, and capable of higher compression. Barney Navarro studied airflow and redesigned combustion chambers so the mixture entered straighter, faster, and cleaner. These were the men who laid the foundation for the modern aftermarket industry, and the Flathead was the perfect laboratory. When hot rodders began mounting 2 or 3 Stromberg 97s on the intake, the Flathead seemed to change its voice. From the gentle thrum of a truck engine, it shifted to a sharp, eager tone, like the breath of an athlete before the starting gun. Add a set of lake pipes, and that sound became raw, metallic, and tight enough that you could feel each ignition pulse through the palm resting on the fender. And then they raced. First on abandoned military airstrips, then on the Bonneville Salt Flats, where Flathead screamed through the wind and left the earliest streaks of speed in hot rod history. It was not the most powerful engine, but it was the one that made people want to learn, to try, to push limits. By the early 1950s, the Flathead 239 had reached its second decade, a long lifespan for any mechanical design. Detroit was evolving, and new names were knocking on the door of the future. When Chevrolet released the 265 small block V8 in 1955, the Flathead era effectively ended overnight. The modern OHV layout was lighter, cooler, and, Most importantly, effortlessly more powerful. While the Flathead struggled with exhaust passages buried inside the block, the small block Chevy surpassed its output with only minor tuning. By 1953 to 1955, the Flathead was discontinued in the civilian market. No fanfare, no tragedy. It stepped off the stage the way an old craftsman would, quietly, knowing it had fulfilled its historical purpose. But strangely, that commercial death opened the door to another form of immortality. Because the moment the world moved into the OHV age, enthusiasts began to view the Flathead differently. No longer comparing horsepower numbers, they focused on the beauty of its architecture, the soul that modern engines, full of wires and sensors, could never replicate. And then came the paradox that still has no complete answer. Why do people spend $20,000 to rebuild a Flathead that makes only 150 horsepower, when the same money could buy a 500 horsepower crate engine? For anyone who has ever stood before a freshly polished Flathead, the answer is almost obvious. A Flathead with its hood open looks like a piece of metal sculpture. Satin-finished aluminum heads, rows of straight bolts, coolant and exhaust passages arranged with compass-like precision. No clutter, no tangled wiring, only aluminum, iron, and the breath of a time when America believed every problem could be solved with a good set of wrenches. The Flathead died because of new technology, but it became immortal because of something technology cannot replace: emotion. And that is the moment we understand. Not every machine is loved for its power. Some are loved for the way they make people feel more fully alive. So what about you? Have you ever stood beside a Flathead idling away, felt the mix of raw gasoline and hot oil brushing against your skin? Or do you have a memory with a classic car, even if it was just one moment behind the wheel? Share your story in the comments, because it is those memories that keep mechanical legends alive. And if you want us to continue dissecting icons like the small block Chevy, the Hemi, or the great Trans Am machines of the golden era, don't forget to hit subscribe. See you next time.